My father told his entire golf club I stole the family business. The accountant who built the books was at table 7. I spent 9 years keeping that business alive while my father took the credit and my brother took the title. I filed the returns, managed the vendors, and covered the shortfalls no one was supposed to know about. Then, at his own club championship luncheon, my father stood up in front of the people whose opinion he valued most and told them I had gutted everything he built. I unfolded my program. I did not look up. What he didn't know was that the woman who had prepared every financial record for that company for 11 years had just heard her own name spoken incorrectly, and she was already reaching for her folder. File folder. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who knows what it costs to keep quiet. This is an original fictional story created for entertainment purposes only. All names, events, and details are adapted and do not represent real individuals or situations. Hashtag family revenge, hashtag silent strength, hashtag true to life stories, hashtag family business, hashtag she counted. Section 4. Full story. My name is Sylvie Okafor. I am 33 years old. And the afternoon of my father's club championship luncheon was when I finally understood that a man can spend a decade watching you hold something together and still convince himself, and everyone around him, that you were the one tearing it apart. The Aldermore Golf and Country Club seated its members for the post-tournament luncheon in the Founders Room, a long, rectangular space with coffered ceilings and framed photographs of club champions going back to 1962. My father, Edmund Okafor, was in 4 of those photographs. He had been a member for 27 years. He knew everyone in the room by name, knew their handicaps and their professional histories, and the particular social calculus of who to seat near whom. He understood Aldermore the way some men understand the street they grew up on, as territory, as identity, as the place where the version of themselves they most wanted to be was most fully reflected back. There were 61 people at the luncheon. I was seated at table 9, near the east window, next to a man named Gerald Fitch who managed commercial real estate and had apparently been my father's foursome partner for 3 years without my knowing it. My brother Desmond was at the head table with my father. I had not expected to be at the head table. I had been to enough of these events to understand where I was placed and what it meant. My father gave his remarks after the salad course. He had the easy, rehearsed fluency of someone who had been making toasts and remarks at events like this for the better part of 3 decades. He thanked the club director. He acknowledged the tournament committee. He told 2 anecdotes about his early membership that I had heard before, and which landed with the comfortable laughter of a room that already liked the speaker. And then he pivoted. He said that he had been thinking lately about legacy, about what a man builds and what happens to it. He said that Okafor Consolidated Supply had been his life's work, 41 years from the first warehouse lease to the current operation. He said that in the last several years, certain decisions had been made without his knowledge or consent, decisions that had hollowed out what he had built. He looked at me when he said hollowed out. He did not look away. She gutted it, he said, and left nothing. The room did not go silent dramatically. It went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has been said that everyone understood was meant for one person, and everyone is waiting to see what that person does. I unfolded my event program. I was holding it already. I had picked it up when I sat down as something to do with my hands. I unfolded it fully and found a detail on the cover photograph to study, a wide-angle shot of the 18th green, the flag casting a shadow at a particular angle, a small figure in the left margin that might have been a groundskeeper. I studied that detail. I did not look at my father. I did not look at the room. I held the program in both hands, and I breathed at a pace I had to consciously regulate. What none of 61 people in the founders' room knew, except possibly for the woman 3 tables over, was that I had in my bag a folder containing 11 years of documents that told a story so different from the one my father had just told that they might as well have been describing 2 separate companies. That woman, the one 3 tables over, was named Constance Almeida. She was 58 years old, a CPA with her own firm, and she had prepared every tax return, every annual financial statement, and every audit-ready report for Okafor Consolidated Supply since the year I was 22 years old and had brought her on myself. My father had met her twice. He remembered her name as Constance something and had referred to her in my presence, more than once, as your accountant, as though I had retained her for personal reasons and she had nothing to do with the company he was now describing as gutted. She had heard her name used in my father's remarks. Not correctly. He had attributed a specific filing to the consolidated accounting team, a team that in practice consisted of Constance Almeida and a junior associate she supervised, both retained and directed by me. She had turned around when she heard it. She was looking at the back of my father's head with an expression I could not fully read from across the room, but that I recognized as the expression of someone who has just heard a factual inaccuracy about their own professional work stated in a public setting. She reached for the leather portfolio on the table beside her plate. I kept my eyes on the 18th green. To understand what my father said at that luncheon, you need to understand what Okafor Consolidated Supply actually was and what my role in it had been, because the distance between those two things is the entire story. My father founded the company in 1983, the year before I was born, with a partner named Howard Belk, who was bought out within 5 years. The company sourced and distributed industrial maintenance supplies, cleaning chemicals, safety equipment, tool consumables, to manufacturing facilities, warehouses, and institutional clients across the region. At its height in the mid-2000s, it had 14 full-time employees, a fleet of 4 delivery vehicles, and gross revenues that my father, when he was proud of it, described as just under $4 million a year.
He was not wrong about that.
He had built something real. I want to be precise about that because my father is not a fiction. He is a man who worked for decades, who built relationships and a reputation and a company from a warehouse lease and a handshake, and the fact that he turned on me does not erase the decades before it. I am telling you what happened, not writing him out of what he made. What changed was the decade after 2008. The manufacturing clients that made up roughly 60% of our revenue base were among the hardest hit sectors in the regional economy during and after the financial crisis. 3 of our largest accounts closed facilities between 2009 and 2012. A 4th restructured its supplier contracts and reduced its order volume with us by 70%. My father, who had spent 25 years building those relationships personally, took the losses as something closer to personal betrayal than market reality, and his response to loss had always been the same. He became less present, not more. He began spending more time at Aldermore. More time with the tournament schedule and the committee work and the social infrastructure of the club, which was genuinely important to him, and which, I understood even then, was the arena where he felt most competent and most seen. He handed me larger and larger operational responsibilities, vendor negotiations, client outreach, collections, the financial reporting, without formally restructuring my title or my compensation, because to do so would have required acknowledging, to himself and to others, that the company now ran through me. My brother Desmond was nominally the general manager. Desmond was 4 years older than me, personable, and genuinely good at the client-facing work that required showing up in person and making people feel confident. He was not good at, and had no particular interest in, the operational and financial infrastructure that made the client-facing work possible. He and I had a working arrangement that was never formalized and never discussed. He went to the meetings, I made sure there was something to have meetings about. Our father preferred this arrangement because it placed Desmond visibly at the center of operations, which was consistent with the version of the family business my father had always imagined, one where the son led and the daughter supported. I supported. I also, over the course of 9 years, rebuilt the revenue base from the bottom up. The client recovery was not dramatic. It was vendor contract renegotiations that took 3 or 4 rounds to close. It was identifying 2 adjacent market segments, food processing facilities and logistics warehouses, that used the same product categories as our traditional manufacturing base, but operated on different economic cycles. It was hiring a part-time sales coordinator named Marcus Webb to support Desmond's outreach, because Desmond could only be in one place at a time, and the new segments required geographic coverage we didn't have. It was managing the receivables manually for 2 years before we could afford software that did it automatically, which meant I spent 3 evenings a week at the office going through invoices with a spreadsheet and a phone. By the time I was 30, the company's gross revenues had recovered to $3.1 million annually. By 32, we were at $3.8 million, with a client base that was more diversified and more stable than the one we'd had at the company's peak. I had also, In that same period, renegotiated our primary warehouse lease when it came up for renewal, a process that took 7 months and that I handled without a broker, saving $47,000 in commission fees, and restructured our insurance portfolio after review by our carrier flagged 2 coverage gaps that could have exposed the company to significant liability. I knew what the company was worth because I had made it worth something. Constance Almeida knew what the company was worth because she had prepared every document that said so. My father knew what the company looked like from Aldermore's founder's room. The rupture, when it came, did not come from one event. It came from a decision my father made 18 months before the luncheon, without consulting me, and the chain of consequences that followed it. He decided to transfer operational control of Okafor Consolidated Supply to Desmond. Not through any formal ownership restructuring. The ownership was and remained in my father's name, with a trust instrument prepared years earlier by an estate attorney named Raymond Chu that designated equal shares to Desmond and me upon my father's death. The transfer was operational. My father told Desmond, and then told me, that Desmond would be taking on full leadership of the company going forward, that my father wanted to step back and let the next generation run it, and that he trusted Desmond to make the right calls. I asked in the meeting in which he told me this in his home office, with Desmond present, what this meant for my role. My father said my role would evolve naturally. He said it in the tone of someone who has already decided something and is explaining it rather than discussing it. What it meant in practice was that Desmond began making operational decisions without consulting me. Some of those decisions were fine. Some were not. He hired a new sales representative in March, a person named Carla Torres who had strong references and whom I thought was a reasonable hire, though I had not been part of the interview process. In May, he restructured the delivery schedule in a way that created a conflict with 3 of our food processing clients' receiving windows, which I identified and flagged to him in writing, and which he corrected after 2 weeks and 1 client complaint. In July, he began a conversation with a regional distributor about a potential partnership arrangement without looping in Constance Almeida or me, and signed a letter of intent that contained a clause I would not have approved, a non-compete provision that would have restricted the company's ability to pursue direct sales in 2 of the segments I had spent 4 years building. I sent Desmond a detailed memo about the non-compete clause on a Thursday. He forwarded it to my father. My father called me on Friday morning and told me I was undermining Desmond's authority and making everything harder than it needs to be. I told him I was trying to protect the company. He told me I needed to understand that things were different now. I asked Constance to prepare a current financial summary of the company, revenues, margins, receivables position, the status of the key contracts, so that I had a clear record of where things stood at the moment operational control was transferred. She prepared it within 2 weeks. I kept a copy. She kept a copy in the client file. Over the following 9 months, 3 of the food processing clients whose accounts I had built reduced their order volumes. One cited a service consistency issue that traced to the delivery schedule change Desmond had made in May and not fully corrected. The regional distributor partnership, once the letter of intent moved toward a full agreement, required the non-compete clause to be renegotiated, a process that cost 4 months and a legal fee of $22,000 that came out of company operating funds. Gross revenues for the fiscal year came in at $3.1 million, down from $3.8 million the prior year, in a market environment that had not meaningfully deteriorated. My father, looking at those numbers from the distance of Aldermore and the version of the story Desmond gave him, concluded that the decline was the result of disruption I had created by interfering in the transition. He had said as much to Desmond. Desmond had not corrected him. I learned what my father believed about me gradually, through the specific texture of family events, a Thanksgiving dinner where he referenced people who can't let go of control, without looking at me, a phone call in January where he asked me whether I had sabotaged the distributor negotiation, a cousin's birthday gathering in March where he told an anecdote about a business he'd known where one person decided they owned what they'd only helped build. I understood what was happening. I documented it. I did not yet know how it would land. The club championship luncheon at Aldermore was in the second week of May. Constance Almeida crossed the founder's room in the way a person crosses a room when they have a professional purpose and are not in a hurry, which is to say steadily, without performance, arriving at my table rather than my father's. She pulled out the chair beside mine. Gerald Fitch had excused himself a few minutes earlier to speak with someone near the bar, and she sat down. She set her leather portfolio on the table between us. "I need to ask you something," she said, quietly enough that the table was not disrupted.
"Go ahead," I said.
"Did your father prepare the materials he referenced in his remarks himself, or did he work from something?" "I don't know what materials he worked from," I said. "I wasn't part of any review process in the last 18 months. She nodded, once, in the way she nodded when she was processing information that confirmed something she had already suspected. She opened the portfolio. Inside was a tab document, her copy of the financial summary she had prepared 14 months earlier, along with the 3 most recent annual statements she had filed for the company. She did not spread the documents out or draw attention to them. She simply opened the portfolio so that I could see what was inside. "The revenue figure he cited," she said, "is from the year before you rebuilt the client base. Not the current year. Not the transition year. The year before." I looked at the first tab. The statement from 9 years ago, when the company was at its lowest point after the client losses. "He also attributed the non-compete issue to a filing error," she said. "There was no filing error. The clause was in the letter of intent that Desmond signed. I have the document." I set my program down on the table. I aligned it with the edge of the tablecloth. "I'm going to need to respond to this," Constance said. "Not today. But the record needs to be accurate. I've been the accountant of record for this company for 11 years, and I was named in remarks that contained material inaccuracies about work I prepared. I have an obligation to the record." "I understand," I said. "I also want you to know," she said, "that the financial summary I prepared 14 months ago, the one you asked for when the transition happened, documents the company's position at that date clearly. Revenues, margins, client base, the segment breakdown. Everything that existed before any decisions Desmond made." She closed the portfolio. She did not make a speech. She did not raise her voice. She picked up her water glass and took a sip and set it back down. At my father's table, across the room, Desmond had leaned over to say something in my father's ear. My father's gaze moved to where Constance was sitting. His expression did not change dramatically. Something in his jaw set. My father had made a statement about work that was documented. The documentation existed. The person who had prepared it was sitting 3 feet from me, with her portfolio closed on the table. That was the room at that moment. I want to be precise about what happened in the days and weeks after the luncheon because the consequence cascade was not a single dramatic event. It was the structural result of my father having made a public statement that could be checked against a paper record, in front of people who had both the professional habit and the social incentive to check it. The first consequence arrived within 4 days. Raymond Chu, the estate attorney who had prepared my father's trust instrument years earlier, contacted me directly. He had been at the luncheon. He was a long-standing club member, a detail I had not known until I saw his name on the seating chart. He said he had heard my father's remarks, and that he wanted to speak with me about the trust document, specifically about whether the operational circumstances of the past 18 months had any bearing on my understanding of my position. I told him I would be glad to speak with him. We met the following Tuesday. Raymond was careful and methodical. He did not tell me what to do. He explained what the trust document said, what the current operational arrangement was, and what the gap between them meant in legal terms. He noted that the trust designated equal ownership shares and that operational control, while currently exercised by Desmond, was not the same as ownership. He also noted that any statements made about a beneficiary's conduct, particularly statements that alleged misappropriation of company assets, had potential implications that my father may not have fully considered when he made them in a semi-public setting. I asked Raymond whether Constance's financial records would be relevant if the question of company value and management ever needed to be formally examined. He said yes. He said records prepared by a CPA of record contemporaneously with a clear audit trail were exactly the kind of evidence that mattered in those situations. I thanked him. I kept a record of the meeting. The second consequence was social, and it moved more slowly but more broadly. Aldermore's membership was not a gossip network in any crude sense. These were professionals who understood reputation and were careful with information. But 61 people had been in the founder's room. Constance Almeida was known to several of them in a professional capacity. Gerald Fitch, the commercial real estate manager who had been at my table, had retained her firm for his own company's accounting work 2 years prior. 2 other members knew her through industry associations. The specific detail that the company's accountant of record, present at the luncheon, had left her own table to sit with the daughter after the father's remarks, was a detail that moved through the membership quietly but completely over the following 3 weeks. My father understood what was moving through the room before I told him anything because he knew Aldermore the way I've described, as territory, as social infrastructure. He felt the shift before he could name it. 2 members who had been in his regular weekend foursome called to reschedule without rescheduling. The club president, a woman named Helen Marsh whom my father had known for 15 years, was polite at the events following the luncheon in the specific way that people are polite when they have formed a revised opinion and are being disciplined about it. The third consequence was the one that took longest to arrive and that my father felt most acutely. The regional distributor, whose partnership Desmond had been negotiating, the one with the non-compete clause, had a principal named Victor Sands who also belonged to Aldermore at a different membership tier. Victor had not been at the luncheon, but he moved in overlapping professional circles with people who had been. When the partnership negotiation, which had already been delayed by the non-compete renegotiation, stalled again in June over a pricing dispute, Victor pulled out of the discussions entirely. Desmond told my father the deal had fallen through due to market conditions. Victor, when asked directly by a mutual contact, said that he had become uncertain about the company's internal stability. I know this because the mutual contact was Gerald Fitch, who told me in an email that was brief and factual and that I have kept in the same folder as everything else. My father called me in late June. It was a Sunday morning. He spoke for about 4 minutes. He said that things had gotten complicated and that he thought there had been some misunderstandings about the company's history and about my role in it. He did not say he had been wrong. He said that Desmond had been maybe given more credit than the situation warranted, and that he may not have had the full picture when he spoke at the luncheon. I let him finish. Then I said, I have the records. Constance has the records. If you want to have an accurate conversation about what happened to the company and when, I'm available to have it. Raymond can be part of that conversation if you want a neutral party. He was quiet for a moment. I know you worked hard, he said. I've always known that. I didn't respond to that directly. I said I would wait to hear from him about whether he wanted to schedule the conversation with Raymond. He said he would think about it. We ended the call. He called Raymond the following week. Raymond called me. We scheduled the meeting for a Friday in mid-July in Raymond's office, with Constance's financial summary as the primary reference document. That meeting took 3 hours. I will not reconstruct it in detail because the detail is not the point. The point is that by the end of it, my father had looked at 11 years of financial records prepared by a CPA of record, had sat with Raymond Shue, who had drafted his own estate documents, and had arrived at a factual understanding of the company's history that was different from the one he had expressed at Aldermore. He did not apologize in the meeting. My father is not a person who apologizes in rooms with other people present. What he did was go quiet in a particular way, the way of someone who has been holding a version of events that required effort to maintain, and has just been relieved of the effort. Raymond proposed a formal operational review. My father agreed to it. The review, conducted by an independent consultant Raymond retained, took 6 weeks. It documented the revenue trajectory from the crisis period through my reconstruction of the client base, the client losses attributable to the delivery schedule change, and the non-compete delay, and the current company position. The consultant's summary noted that the company's strongest revenue period in the past decade had occurred during the years of my direct operational involvement. Desmond read the summary. He did not dispute it. He and I have not discussed it directly, which is its own kind of statement, and which I have decided to accept as the version of acknowledgement I am going to get from him. The partnership with Victor Sands did not revive. The company's revenues stabilized at $3.2 million in the following fiscal year, not where they had been, but with a clearer operational structure, defined roles, and an agreement between my father and Raymond and me about what my involvement going forward would look like, and what it would be called. What it is called now is Director of Operations. In writing, with a formal scope of responsibilities and a compensation structure that reflects them. Raymond drafted the agreement. My father signed it. I countersigned it on a Tuesday afternoon in August, at Raymond's conference table, with Constance Almeida as a witness because she had been the record keeper for 11 years, and it seemed right that she should be there when the record was officially corrected. It is now 16 months after the club championship luncheon at Aldermore. I still work for Okafor Consolidated Supply. I want to be honest about that because I know it is not the ending that makes the cleanest story. I did not walk away. I did not start my own company with the contacts I had built, though I considered it, and the consideration was real and specific and lasted about 3 months. I stayed because the company was something my father had built from nothing, and because I had spent 9 years making it survivable, and because walking away from it at that point would have meant handing the results of 9 years of work to a version of the company that didn't have me in it. I was not willing to do that. What changed is that I am no longer invisible in it. The title is on the organizational chart. The compensation is in the system. The scope is in the agreement. When Constance files the annual return, it reflects an operational structure that is accurate. My relationship with my father is not warm. It is functional, and it has the particular quality of functionality that exists between two people who have looked at the same set of documents and arrived at the same facts, even if one of them arrived later and reluctantly. He does not raise the subject of a luncheon. I do not raise it either. We talk about the company the way people talk about something they are both responsible for, which is a different kind of conversation than the ones we had before. Desmond and I work together in the way that two people work together when one of them has been given an accurate picture of a situation and is still processing what to do with it. He defers to my operational judgment in the areas where my track record is clear. He does not defer in areas where he believes his judgment is stronger, which is his right. It is, overall, a more honest arrangement than the one we had before, which had the appearance of collaboration and the reality of one person carrying what the other was credited with. I see Constance Almeida twice a year for scheduled reviews and as needed in between. She prepared this year's annual return with a cover letter that noted, for the first time in the company's history, my name and titles alongside the company's principals. I read that cover letter 3 times when she sent me the draft. I approved it as written. What I know now, that I did not fully know before, is this: a record kept carefully enough will outlast the story someone tells about it. My father told 61 people at Aldermore that I had gutted the company he built. Constance Almeida had 11 years of documents that said otherwise. The documents did not argue. They did not raise their voice. They sat in a leather portfolio at a lunch table, and the room eventually caught up to what was in them. You cannot be erased from a record you built yourself. There was a moment between when Constance closed her portfolio at my table and when my father saw her sitting beside me, where the room shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public in any dramatic sense. It was 61 people in a room where the accountant had just left her own seat and crossed the floor. If you were in a room like that, where a record you knew existed was about to speak louder than the person talking about you, what did it feel like in the moment before it did? If this story reflected something you know, leave a comment. Share it with someone who has kept their own records. And if you haven't subscribed yet, there are more stories where this one came from, and the next one is already waiting. I'm Sylvie Okafor. The agreement is signed. The title is on the document. And the record is accurate.